Stanford University.
Hi, I'm Kelly McGonigal. I'm a health psychologist at Stanford and the author of The Willpower Instinct. Welcome to Open Office Hours. Here's a great question that came in from Facebook from Michael. Michael says, you are a strong advocate for the benefits of meditation, from willpower to stress reduction. What do you say to the contrarians who argue that backers of meditation cherry-pick examples from an array of studies with no real scientific consensus? And how is a layperson to know who to believe when someone contradicts what another person claims to be backed by research? This is a really great question, and I actually want to take it as an opportunity to share with you a little bit about how I think of my responsibility as someone who communicates research to the public, as well as maybe give some advice for those of you who are confused by seemingly contradictory advice that you might see in the media or read in books or hear on TV. And then I also want to speak a little bit about the role that meditation plays in my own life and why it is that it's something that I'm personally quite passionate about. So when I'm thinking about whether or not to share a scientific finding with the community, I take it very seriously to consider whether or not there's an entire research base to support it. And I might enjoy telling a specific study like a story to help people connect to an idea. But I think it's very important not to share early findings or maybe that sexy new finding that was just published in Psych Science that really isn't backed up by other research. So when I present research, it really is coming from a wide body of research, hopefully by more than one laboratory, that's all pointing in the same direction. And I think that that's important responsibility for somebody who is communicating science to the public. Now, I also think it's really important when you as an individual are trying to think, well, do I take this advice? And that's an interesting study, but does it really apply to me? I think everyone needs to treat themselves like they are their own science experiment. And to remember that even from the most convincing studies, the best designed studies, even if they're supported by so many studies in different laboratories, that any finding you hear about is based on an average. It may be, whether it's something like meditation or a new drug therapy, that there's an average benefit shown to people in the study. And in any given study, there are going to be some people who benefited a lot from that treatment or that practice, and there will be some people who didn't benefit at all. And a significant finding just means that in general, this was helpful to most of the people in the study. And you always have to ask yourself whether that's going to be true for you. It's not just for meditation, but it's for anything that you hear about. And so I encourage people to take it as a hypothesis in their own life. And if you're interested in pursuing something you hear about, to set up your own experiment, give it a try, whether it's meditation or exercise or therapy or whatever it is that is supposed to improve your life or give you some sort of benefit. And be willing to believe your own data, that you may be an outlier. Or you may be one of those people for whom this is truly beneficial. And I think it's really important to trust the data that your own brain, your own body, and your own life gives to you, and be willing to conduct that experiment on yourself. Now, when it comes to meditation specifically, meditation is one of those things that I feel fairly confident about in terms of its ability to help people, whether it is improving brain health or reducing unnecessary stress and suffering. And just to give you a sense of some of the data that I'm pulling from, a recent study that was published in 2012 from psychologists at the University of Bergen in Norway did a meta-analysis of all of the studies that had ever been published, as well as any unpublished studies they could find, that looked at whether or not meditation and mindfulness is helpful for anxiety and depression. And they found that there were significant positive effects for both of those, for anxiety and depression. And they also found from their analysis that given the few dozen studies that they had found, there would have to be over 700 studies showing absolutely no benefit whatsoever to nullify the results that they found for anxiety. And they would need to find almost 400 studies showing absolutely no benefit whatsoever to nullify the results that they found for meditation and mindfulness benefiting depression. So I feel like that's the type of evidence that I like to see before I would go out in the world and really suggest something to people. And to know that those types of analyses are available, that there are people who are trying to look at contradictory research and ask the very important question of how solid is this finding, and how much research would there have to be out there that was unpublished or contradictory to really say, we're not so confident about these benefits. And the last thing I would say sort of taking off the scientist hat and speaking more as a human being, is that one of the reasons I talk so much about meditation is because of how much it has helped me in my life. And I feel like that's an important thing for someone who's in a role of a teacher to be able to share, to really be teaching something from personal experience and not only from theory or from intellect. And so one of the reasons that I share meditation is because I know it at a heartfelt and lived experience. And I think that, if you're going to go to a coach, you would hope they would have some experience as an athlete. If you're going to go to a financial advisor, you would hope that they actually live by the financial principles they're sharing. And if you were seeking religious advice, you would hope that that person actually has faith and lives the values that they preach. And so for me, I teach the thing that I know and that supported me in my life. And it doesn't mean it's going to work for everyone. And I really encourage people to go out and find the thing that works for them. And the best that I can do is share the things that work for me. The very first question that came in on Facebook was one that actually I was surprised to see come up right away. And this was a question about what to do with family stress over the holidays. Molly shared her experience that it feels as though holidays are the time when you're supposed to be with your family, and your family is this great source of support, and everything is perfect and wonderful at home. And yet her direct experience is quite different. She experiences a lot of frustration about things she experienced as a child and as an adult. There's some guilt and some shame and maybe some anger and regret about her family experiences. And not only was this the first question that came up in response to holiday stress and willpower, but it was the most commonly asked question. And so many of you came in and said, this is actually something that's really present for you over the holidays and something that's on your mind. And so I wanted to start by even just naming that how interesting it is that when we talk about willpower challenges over the holidays, it's not how do I avoid eating that extra fruitcake that people are really thinking about. Holiday stress isn't necessarily how am I going to get exactly the right gifts for my kids this Christmas. That the actual stress and challenges around holidays can be that gap between what we hope holidays are about, the perfect family and feeling unconditionally loved, and our more direct experience, which may be very different from that. And I wanted to start by expressing my gratitude for Molly for bringing that to the surface, and to the many people who chimed in and said that was their experience also, because I think one of the reasons that this creates so much stress over the holidays is the lack of transparency many people have, where they feel like they are the only one for whom the holidays are not some warm, cheery, glowy, perfect holiday story. And they may feel like they're the only one who feels more isolated or is more aware of the pain that comes from not having had the childhood you hope that you had as you celebrate this magical time of the year. So I want to thank people for sharing that. And in terms of advice, there's really not easy advice for this. And so I wanted to say a little bit more about how I think about this particular form of holiday stress, in the hopes that it might allow you, if you're dealing with this, to have a little bit more self-compassion for this really challenging experience. And also maybe for those of you who really do have a delightful family experience over the holidays, a little bit more compassion and understanding of what other people in your life might be experiencing. It does seem as though for many people, we experience this deep, heartfelt need for unconditional love from our family of origins. And for whatever reason, that is not the experience that many people have, whether it's due to actual abuse and trauma, or whether it's due to just the differences in personalities between parents and caregivers and you as a child and as an adult. There, for so many people, seems to be that gap between what is desired and what is experienced. And the holidays really bring this to the surface. And I guess the first way that I think about the holidays and dealing with family stress is to recognize that this pain will be present kind of regardless of what you choose to do for the holidays. You know, Molly asked and some other people asked, well, should I even spend time with my family? It feels maybe toxic to spend time with them, and maybe there's guilt about not spending time with them, and then also disappointment if you do spend time with them about not being the sort of the love fest that you would hope for. And I think it's really important to recognize that as an adult, this pain is going to be present no matter what you choose to do. And being able to accept that that's going to be part of the holiday experience. And you get to choose as an adult which version of that you want, and what you want to contribute, and how you want to engage with reality. You get to choose from your own values. Is it important for you to be with family or not? And to know that you can make that choice autonomously, that there's no one who can force you to spend time with your family, and there's also no reason that you can't choose to spend time with a family situation that isn't perfect and has some pain present. And really have a sense of walking into the situation with awareness of what you're willing to give, what you would like to give, and what you're able to give to yourself, whether it's acceptance or whether it's your own love that you can give to yourself, and what it is that you are hoping to experience. And to know that whatever choice you make, if you're doing it from that point of view, you can't do it wrong, whether you choose to spend time with your family or not, and whatever version of yourself you choose to bring to the holiday experience. And with that said, the one thing that I have found very helpful in terms of coming to peace with what often feels like personal suffering that can be very isolating, like feeling like perhaps you're the only person who doesn't have a perfect family to spend the holidays with, is to start to broaden your perspective, to understand all of the other types of people who are suffering, and maybe not in an identical way, but who at sort of the core of what you're feeling, they know what that feels like also. And one of my favorite exercises for self-compassion around any type of pain or suffering is one that we teach at Stanford in the Stanford Compassion Cultivation Training. And it's an exercise in common humanity of really thinking about what it is that you're dealing with, and then broadening your perspective to think about the countless other people who also know what that feels like in some way. When I think about holiday stress and suffering, I think about the fact that even though we may see on TV and movies and hear in the holiday songs about how happy everyone is and how warm the homes are and all of that magic, that actually there are countless people who are dealing with grief for the first time this holiday season, the loss of a child or a spouse or a parent, and that's their reality this holiday season. There are people who are spending the holidays in prison for the first time or separated by war. There are people who are alone for the first time, who have never spent a holiday alone before. And there are so many ways in which countless people are meeting their own gap between what they might idealize for the holidays and what their reality is. And when you can hold that kind of more common or universal suffering in your mind, you can actually find a place of compassion and acceptance for whatever it is that you yourself are going through. And one of the exercises of common humanity that I often draw on is to try to bring those others to mind and to hold myself in that group and to actually connect to the part of me that would say, may we all be happy and may we all find peace in the suffering. And having that perspective can sometimes make it more possible to then deal with the very specifics of whatever is your own gap between an ideal holiday season and what it is that is present for you. Another great question that we got in on Facebook was, how do I quit smoking over the holidays? And it's true, holidays can seem like a really difficult time to make a behavior change, whether it's quitting smoking or starting exercise or anything that you kind of use as a crutch to help you get through daily life. And so the first thing I want to say is it actually is never a good time. One of the mistakes that a lot of people make when it comes to behavior change is to recognize how challenging a change is in the present moment, because you're aware of your stress, you are aware of all of the social influences that might be encouraging you to smoke or to drink a little bit extra, to spend some money or to indulge in food. That all feels very real right now. And it often seems like in the future, things will be easier, that there won't be those same pressures, you won't feel as much stress, or you won't be as tired, or there won't be as many opportunities to indulge. And one of the things we know from the science of willpower is that that prediction is almost always wrong. But we often use that prediction to postpone change that we really, we could take up now if we chose to. So my first encouragement is to say there's no better time to try to quit smoking or make a change than during the holidays, in part because you can think of it as a gift that you are giving yourself. And one of the things that I always recommend any time of the year is to actually recruit social support for making a change like quitting smoking. And the holidays are a great time to let people know that this is a gift that they can give you, that during this time of the year, what you need most is maybe some moral support. Or maybe you know yourself best and you need some friendly nudges or reminders. Maybe you need someone to help hold you accountable. Or maybe you know that the best gift that a friend or coworker could give you is to give you a pep talk when you give in and when they catch you smoking. And you should give yourself permission to ask for this help. Often we don't tell people we're trying to make a change because we aren't sure if we can do it, and we don't want to set ourselves up for the embarrassment of having not succeeded or being nagged if we don't quite get it right. So I'd really encourage you to tell the people in your life who care about you that this is what you are trying to do for the holidays, and this is a gift that they can give you to support you both when you're successful and when you have setbacks. The other thing I would say is that as you're trying to make this change, whether it's quitting smoking or any other change, to think about practicing a process rather than achieving a perfect outcome. So with the example of quitting smoking, your process might be to delay a cigarette. And when you feel that craving, your first task is to notice it and maybe just put off smoking for a minute or two. Maybe, after a couple days, you can stretch it to putting it off for 5 minutes or even 10 minutes. And to practice the process of noticing wanting to smoke, remembering your intention to quit smoking, and then practicing the choice that is going to be required to eventually succeed at not smoking that cigarette. And research shows that if you practice this delay, or you practice making very small steps in the direction of a difficult change, that process gives you the strength you need to make the final commitment to your goal. And actually trust that process, because too often we think that quitting smoking means not smoking another cigarette. And often the process of quitting or the process of choosing any new behavior is one of taking small steps in the direction of change and not necessarily always succeeding, or not necessarily succeeding in the ideal version. So if you combine those two, get some social support, tell people it's their gift to you this holiday season to support you, and then figure out what it would look like to practice small steps in that direction, then you are going to be in excellent shape for your New Year's resolution. We got a few questions on Facebook about school stress. One from Jen, who is a high school student trying to get into college, dealing with AP exams, and experiencing a lot of anxiety and self-doubt. And she wants to know, how can she overcome the self-doubt that seems to be getting in the way of her success and ability to handle stress? And we also heard from Lena, who had the question of, what is a manageable amount of stress for a high school student to have? When does it cross the line from being good stress to harmful stress? And so I want to tackle both at once. The first thing that I want to say to Jen and to anyone else who is aware of anxiety and self-doubt as they pursue a goal is to actually take seriously the question of whether that self-doubt or anxiety is even a problem that needs to be fixed. And one of the things we know from psychology and from neuroscience is that if we put our attention on inner experiences that we think we shouldn't have, like self-doubt, or feeling like a fraud, or uncertainty about whether we'll succeed, or even the physical sensations of anxiety, if we put our focus there and we try to control those inner experiences, it almost always backfires. It tends to strengthen those experiences, so we feel even more self-doubt and less certain. We feel even more stressed and more anxious. And it often, all of that energy that's used in trying to deal with our inner experiences gets pulled away from the energy we need to simply take action in the direction of our goals. And so my first piece of advice to anyone who is experiencing stress, anxiety, self-doubt, is to know that those things are not necessarily a barrier to your ability to succeed. And in fact, they say very little about your possibility of success. If you talk to the most successful people in the world, many of them are still crippled with self-doubt and anxiety. And many of them believed that those inner experiences would go away when they finally reached a certain level of success. And to their surprise, they found no, those inner experiences came along with them for the journey, whether it was passing the AP exam, getting into college, graduating college, becoming a doctor, starting your own business, winning awards, whatever the measure of success is, often those inner experiences go along. And in part, what those inner experiences tell you is that you're pursuing something that you care about. And in a way, they can be a signal to you that you're on the right track. One of the best pieces of advice I ever got from one of my teachers was that if I ever felt like I wanted to run in the opposite direction from something, that was probably the best signal my body and brain could give me to head straight at it, because that was my body and brain really noticing that this is something incredibly important to me, and that anxiety or self-doubt was a signal to pursue, not to run away or back down. So rather than give advice about how to get rid of that self-doubt, I actually want to encourage you to think about that as an experience that you can hold even as you pursue your goals, that you don't need to get rid of it, and it's not a sign that something is going wrong. And in fact, the way that that self-doubt might get transformed over time is by your own observation that you actually have the willingness to pursue these things, and your direct experience of going after what you want will help you realize that not only can you handle the stress, but that you have what it takes to overcome obstacles, inner or outward. Now, in terms of the question of what is good stress versus too much stress, I actually think that there's a very similar answer here. And we know that the type of stress that tends to make people sick, that tends to make people really unhappy and miserable or get in the way of well-being, is the type of stress that is attached to trying to avoid outcomes you don't want, avoidance goals. So if you were to think of a high school student, what an avoidance goal might look like. Maybe this is someone who is studying very hard, staying up at night because they don't want to disappoint their parents. Or maybe they are afraid of what it would say about them if they didn't get A's on their report card. They are afraid that their life will be over if they don't get into the right school. And everything that they're doing is motivated by not wanting to do the wrong thing or let people down. That type of stress can actually be quite toxic. On the other hand, the same types of outer pressures and the same type of behavior, staying up late to study, working hard, can be quite positive when it's perceived as being in the pursuit of something you care about, an approach goal. Maybe the student has a vision of their life. They have a sense of their strengths and what they want to contribute to the world. Maybe they view it as a big adventure or a competition that's kind of fun to sort of test what is possible for them. And those same behaviors and those same pressures, when they're experienced as being in the pursuit of something that is interesting, that is an adventure, that is helping you be the person you want to be and contribute what you want to contribute to the world, those same stresses often people can thrive under. And so in many cases, it's not about trying to change the situation, to take away some of the pressures, but to really reflect yourself on what it is you care about and what is behind the drive to pursue these things or to reach these goals. And if it's a kid in your life that you care about, to have those conversations with them and to try to bring some light to whether it's these avoidance goals that are driving the behavior, and to start to think about how you might be able to redirect your attention or the attention of the child you care about towards something that feels like more of a positive approach motivation. And in that way, there's a kind of natural resilience that often comes up when people feel like they are pursuing something they care about. One question we received on Facebook was about a scientific finding that willpower is a depletable resource. So first of all, I'm very impressed that people are up on their willpower science. But for those of you who haven't heard about this, this is the finding that it seems as though whenever we use self-control to resist an impulse or a temptation, to try to motivate ourselves to do something that's difficult or boring, to maybe overcome anxiety, that they all seem to draw on one source of strength or one kind of energy. And there's a lot of research suggesting that if people are spending that energy on one thing, say dieting or trying to control their emotions, they may run out of that willpower for other goals. So the person who's counting calories all day may come home and suddenly find that she or he doesn't have the energy to tackle an important project or to focus their attention on their kids. And this has been a really popular finding over the last 15 years, that willpower is a depletable resource. And the question was, is there anything you can do about this? And the first thing I'll say is that there's newer research coming out of Stanford from Greg Walton and from Carol Dweck, showing that how you even think about willpower has a big influence on whether or not your willpower gets depleted sooner. They've shown that your mindset about willpower can actually give you more willpower reserve or less willpower reserve. And it's really important to take what Carol Dweck would call an incremental or growth mindset about willpower rather than a fixed mindset. It turns out not to be very helpful to think that you have a very limited supply of willpower. So many times I hear people say, "Ugh, I didn't get the willpower gene," or "I just don't have any of that." And that mindset itself actually makes it much more difficult for you to access the very real strength and reserves that you have. So it's much more helpful to think about willpower as being a muscle that you can strengthen, and that the more you use it, actually, the more reserves you get. In the same way that if you were to exercise regularly, if you go for a run, the next time you go for a run, it's going to be easier because you've taught your heart and your muscles and your nervous system how to use energy better. And your body changes in response to that challenge. And the same seems to be true for the brain and for willpower, that when you challenge your brain to get better at things that are difficult for it, including resisting temptation or focusing your attention, it learns from that challenge and it rebuilds itself to make those challenges easier in the future. So just knowing that any willpower challenge you face now will get easier with time is a really important source of extra willpower reserve. Now, the other thing I'll say is that there's a lot of research suggesting that you can actually replenish depleted willpower on a moment-to-moment basis by giving yourself something that really restores your mood or your attentional reserve. So for example, spending time outdoors has been shown to help people restore their willpower. Going for a walk or being physically active seems to help put the brain in a state that gives you greater attention and self-control and emotion regulation ability. Listening to music that you love, spending time with people you care about, anything that feels like it's kind of nourishing is something that has been demonstrated to restore spent willpower. And these are things that you can think about prioritizing, even though we tend to think of them as perhaps indulgences. We think, oh, I'll do them when I have more time, but now I really have to get this stuff done. And in fact, if you're facing what feels like a depletion of willpower, that may be when it's most important to take a break and to look for the thing that is not an indulgence. You don't need to get drunk, or you don't need to go, shopping or whatever it is that might feel like a treat, but to really look for the thing that feels nourishing, that puts you back in a state of feeling ready to approach whatever is challenging in your life. That's it for now. Thank you for joining me for Open Office Hours. Thanks for all of the great questions. May you have a wonderful holiday season, and may you give yourself the gift of going after what it is you really care about.
Stanford University.